HOA Karen, who has abused her power and built an illegal horse racing track on my land. But she doesn't know that the person she is facing is not an ordinary person. Welcome to Karen Karma. Have you ever encountered an HOA Karen? Please share your story in the comments. My neighborhood, in the past, was a peaceful and quiet place. The road stretched out, the houses were charming, and the mornings were gentle when everyone greeted each other with a friendly smile. Everyone in the neighborhood respected each other, and each person had a responsibility to the community life. No one dared to break the rules, and no one felt the need to fight for their rights because everything was peaceful. However, when Karen, the HOA president, took over, everything began to change rapidly. She appeared like a storm, destroying all the peace that once existed. With her unreasonable abuse of power, Karen began imposing new rules that no one dared to oppose. She constantly manipulated the situation, always finding ways to control the smallest details in the neighborhood, from setting the lawn mowing times to organizing the items in the yard. Not only that, she also gave orders to the residents as if they were puppets with no decision-making power. Those who did not comply with Karen's orders were immediately threatened with unreasonable punishments. A tense and fearful atmosphere began to spread throughout the neighborhood. Everyone felt exhausted and oppressed under her rule. As for me, I am the governor of the state, but no one in the neighborhood knows that. I chose to live a simple life, not wanting to flaunt my power. I like to stay in the shadows, living a normal life without attention. However, Karen did not allow me to have the peaceful life I desired. One morning, when I was walking around the neighborhood, I happened to see a strange scene from afar. The loud sounds of machinery, the shouting of workers, and the dust rising from my land made me feel that something was wrong. I hurriedly walked closer, and my heart seemed to stop when I saw what was happening before my eyes. Karen was standing on a pile of dirt being leveled, surrounded by a large area being turned into a massive horse racing track. A long winding racetrack, covered with fine sand, horse stables being firmly constructed, and even a grandstand gradually being completed. A series of trucks carrying materials were lined up. Workers were working tirelessly, hurriedly building the area as if they were constructing a legal project. But this was my land. Hurry up, we don't have time. Karen shouted at a worker, while the others around seemed not to dare respond. What was even more surprising was that her grand opening ceremony had been held right on my land, with banners, loudspeakers, and a crowd gathering as if this were an important community event. Everything was happening openly, as if she completely believed she had the right to do anything on this land. A wave of anger rose in me, and a strong resistance surged within me, making it impossible for me to stand still. This was my property, and I couldn't let someone like Karen exploit her power to invade it so arrogantly. I felt deeply offended by her tyrannical actions. This land was not hers to build whatever she wanted. I couldn't let this pass easily. I knew I would face an uncompromising battle, but I was ready to fight to protect what was mine. I couldn't stand still any longer. The anger within me seemed ready to explode. I quickly walked towards Karen, trying to stay calm despite the turmoil in my mind. The workers continued working, but now I could only focus on the woman in front of me, the one who had abused her power to the point where she no longer knew where the limits were. When I got closer, Karen's eyes briefly showed a look of challenge. She stood there, looking at me with a smug smile on her face, as if she were waiting for how I would react. I stood firm in front of her, not backing down. In a serious tone, but calm, Maris, what are you doing on my land? You don't have the right to build anything here. Oh, you're here to take a look, Karen said, her voice sharp. This is a project proposed by the HOA to improve the quality of life in this neighborhood, and I'm working for the common good. You have no right to interfere. I stood frozen, a strong feeling of being offended rising in me. "This is my land," I replied, my voice calm but tense. "You cannot build here without my consent." Karen smirked, not at all concerned. She raised her hand and pointed toward the busy construction site, as if everything that was happening was perfectly normal. "Oh, don't worry. I have approval from the HOA. This is a community development project. It will benefit the whole neighborhood." Everyone agrees with me. Her words were full of confidence, as if she had the right to do anything without anyone's consent. But I was not easily convinced. I, firmly, stressing each word, "This is my land, Maris. You don't have the right to use it without my consent, and I don't want to hear your absurd excuses." Karen scoffed, waving her hand as if I were not worth her time. "You can sue if you want, but I've done everything according to the HOA regulations. Don't worry, this neighborhood will thrive because of my project." Karen's words felt like a thorn piercing my heart, making it impossible for me to stay still any longer. She stood there with her arrogant smile and challenging attitude, as if she had the upper hand and everything was under her control. The anger inside me rose like a massive wave, just waiting to burst. I couldn't let her disregard my rights any longer, and I decided I wouldn't let this abuse of power continue. Without thinking further, I pulled my phone out of my pocket and slowly dialed the state inspector's office. Every second felt like it stretched my anxiety even more, but I knew I had to act immediately. I emphasized every word when the call was connected. "I need you to come immediately. Stop all construction on my land." There was a brief silence on the other end, then a serious voice of the person in charge responded. "Okay, we will send the inspection team right away, sir." After hanging up, I turned to look at Karen. She was still standing there, her eyes full of smug satisfaction. She continued to direct the workers as if everything was going according to her plan. Everything seemed to be under Karen's control, but I knew she couldn't have anticipated that I would take such decisive action. Not long after, the sound of police sirens could be heard in the distance, gradually followed by the appearance of large police cars and the state inspection team. When the inspection team and police arrived, the atmosphere around seemed to freeze. Everyone in the neighborhood stopped and watched, and I could see Karen standing still, her eyes following the inspection team as they entered the construction site. The trucks and workers who were working suddenly stopped, and the sharp sound of police sirens echoed in the tense air. An inspector stepped forward, looking at Karen with a serious expression. He opened his mouth, his voice calm but full of authority. "Mrs. Maris, this project must stop immediately. We have received a request from the landowner to cease all construction activities and dismantle the current structures." Karen stood frozen. She looked at the inspector in bewilderment, as if she couldn't understand what was happening. Her eyes moved from the inspector to me, and I could clearly see the confusion and shock written all over her face. "Karen," her voice trembling, trying to appear calm. "What? This project has been approved. You can't do this." Another inspector, standing next to the one who spoke, looked at Karen and confirmed. "This project does not have legal permission. We are acting on a request from the landowner. If you do not cooperate, we will take further steps." Karen turned to look at me, her face paling, and at that moment, I could see that she had completely lost control. What she thought was absolute control suddenly collapsed right before her eyes. Karen, stammering, weakly, "Who, who are you? How could you?" Now, everything began to become clear. I stepped forward, my eyes never leaving Karen. The inspector standing next to me looked at Karen and slowly said, "Ma'am, he is the governor of the state, and everything you've done today is not only an infringement of others' rights, but also an abuse of power that is unacceptable." Karen stood frozen, unable to believe what was happening. She turned to look at the inspection team, hoping to find an explanation, but everything was slipping out of her grasp. My gaze remained steady and firm. I wasn't just a victim of deception. I was the governor of the state, and she was facing a power she couldn't have anticipated. One inspector approached, looked at her, and made a demand. We will be reviewing all the documentation related to this project. You will be held legally responsible if any violations are found. Karen could only stand and watch, her lips moving, but she could not say a word. The workers around her also exchanged confused looks, not understanding what was happening. But the tension in the air made them realize that everything was now beyond Karen's control. She turned to look at me, then at the inspectors, her eyes no longer filled with confidence, but with confusion and fear. I felt a sense of victory rise within me, but I maintained a cold expression, devoid of emotion. Karen, trembling, eyes filled with fear. You, you're the governor. I, looking her straight in the eyes calmly. Do you think you can abuse your power without facing consequences? You will be held accountable for these actions. She began to cry, tears rolling down the face that had once been full of confidence and arrogance. She knelt down, grasped my hand, and sobbed. I was wrong. I never thought it would go this far. Please, I never meant to hurt anyone. I just thought this project would help the neighborhood grow, give people jobs. Please don't report me to the higher authorities. I'll stop immediately. Please forgive me. Karen's eyes were now filled with confusion and fear, completely different from the arrogance and defiance she had before. She was no longer the powerful figure standing above all. Now she was just someone begging for forgiveness, someone with no power left in her hands. Karen, crying, voice trembling. I'll fix everything. I'll apologize to everyone. I, I will step down from this position. Please, don't do this to me, please. I looked at her with no sympathy. Her actions had hurt too many people, and I couldn't let her easily escape the consequences. But I also knew, no matter how much she cried and begged, she had placed herself in this situation. I couldn't overlook her abuse of power. Karen stood motionless, unable to speak, while the inspectors began reviewing the documents. I am not someone who likes to flaunt power, but when justice is threatened, I cannot stand by and allow Karen to freely infringe upon my rights. The whole neighborhood now knew who the real person with power was in this story. After the investigation ended, everything unfolded as quickly as a gust of wind. Karen was removed from her position as HOA president, something she never expected. Not only that, she was heavily fined for building illegally on my land without consent. The fraudulent documents and permits she had provided were exposed. The whole incident led to her being ostracized and losing all credibility in the community. The residents of the neighborhood, who had once been afraid and had to endure Karen's abuse of power, now rejoiced. That day, when the announcement about Karen's removal was made, the whole neighborhood erupted in joy. Everyone gathered together, many clapping in approval, and cheers and praise echoed everywhere. Some people even came to meet me, shaking my hand and thanking me for standing up for fairness in the community. One resident, joyfully clapping. Thank you for helping us get rid of Karen's oppression. Finally, we can live in a peaceful neighborhood like we used to. The thank yous kept coming, and I just smiled, feeling satisfied that I had done the right thing. But I knew this was not just my victory. It was the victory of the entire community. Just a few days later, when everything had calmed down, I received the notification that Karen had to compensate for the damages caused by her illegal construction project. This punishment was unavoidable. However, the most unfortunate thing for Karen was that she had to sell her house and leave the neighborhood in shame. All of her assets were partly seized to compensate for the damages she had caused, and rumors about Karen's downfall quickly spread everywhere. On the day she left, I saw Karen standing in front of her empty house, her eyes red, no longer full of arrogance, but only complete collapse. She climbed into the truck to move her belongings, saying nothing, but I could feel the defeat and humiliation in every step she took. The door to her house closed, and Karen disappeared from the neighborhood. A new chapter began, one without abuse of power, without oppression. Everyone was delighted to see justice being served. Karen had to pay for her abuse of power. When she left, I felt satisfied that justice had prevailed. My land returned to its peaceful state, and the people were happy to be rid of Karen. I had protected my rights, and life in this neighborhood continued as it had before. Everything returned to normal, and I knew that justice had been done. I had not allowed abuse of power to continue controlling our lives. What do you think of the story? Have you ever encountered a Karen like this? Leave a comment and don't forget to like and subscribe to the Karen Karma channel.